Hello and welcome to A Critical Dragon, where I talk about narrative in film, television, and in books. And today I want to talk about Zack Snyder's Rebel Moon. Now, let me get this out of the way. If you really enjoyed Zack Snyder's film, this is not going to be a video that you are particularly going to enjoy. I watched it and I didn't enjoy it, and I'm going to explain why. This isn't a rant, and this isn't a making fun of the thing. But I want to talk about the reasons it didn't work for me and why I think they're related to the underlying storytelling technique rather than I didn't like the CGI, which there were moments that I didn't like the CGI. But I want to talk about the underlying story because I think that is important in understanding how stories are told, why certain stories seem more powerful than others. And I think Rebel Moon is actually a good example of this. So we know that this project started off as a Star Wars story. And even if you didn't know that, when you listen to the opening narration uh, by Sir Anthony Hopkins, he's the one doing it. It's very well delivered. But when you listen to that, you can hear Star Wars. And what I mean by this is the opening narration setting the scene for this world. There isn't an opening crawl. Zack Snyder, didn't do the opening crawl. He didn't copy Star Wars. But in the opening narration, there is a long line of kings. And this long line of kings were treacherously assassinated. And now the chief general, essentially the senator, has usurped the power as regent and sent his most able, most villainous, most dangerous, evil lieutenant out to crush any rebel. So if this is reminiscent at all of Senator Palpatine taking control of the Senate and then setting himself up as emperor and then sending Darth Vader out to crush rebellion, you can be forgiven for noticing that massive similarity. And this is one aspect of Rebel Moon that I think is a weakness. In taking something that was initially designed for Star Wars, Snyder clearly has script away some of the Star Wars elements and then painted a very thin veneer over the top of it. But a story designed for Star Wars was going to have those certain elements, and there isn't enough facade over the top of it to disguise that fact. So, for instance, we have the young hero on an agricultural planet, obviously not a desert planet, even though Luke was a moisture farmer. This person is a wheat farmer. Big difference. Luke was a boy. The main character here is a girl. Big difference. No, no, they're not. Very minor difference. The planet is in the middle of nowhere. It's a backwater planet, and that's where this person is. They are hiding out deliberately. Luke was hidden there by Obi-Wan. It's not a huge difference. The hero goes to a den of villainy to hire a pilot to take them on this quest to find people to help them defend their village. So obviously, this is not the Mos Eisley Cantina, and they're not going to meet Han Solo, a roguish smuggler. And that's the problem. They do. And even then, with this sequence, although it is definitely not the same saloon, they walk in and people look around at them the same way that it happens in Star Wars. Admittedly, which we have to say about Star Wars, is the same thing that you take from a Western. Like this happened all the time in Westerns. But they go in and then someone picks a fight with them. Now, admittedly, that person wasn't wanted in 7-star systems. And they took a liking to one of them rather than, I don't like you, my friend doesn't like you. But the fight still ensues. It's exactly the same sequence as well, not exactly. It is remarkably similar to the same sequence in Star Wars. That plagues this throughout. That it's not so much that this is, as it was built, an original story, something different, an independent, innovative, new story. This is repackaged stuff that we have already seen. Another big influence on Rebel Moon is Seven Samurai, Kurosawa's great film. And what we have here is, again, sequences lifted almost entirely from Seven Samurai and just plunked down into this with very little to disguise them. And that causes issue. This does not feel new. It does not feel innovative. But I had said at the beginning, before we talk about the Kurosawa stuff, I want to talk about an underlying issue with this. And it has to do with that opening introduction, the prologue, the voiceover at the beginning that is setting the scene. There is a long line of kings who were villainous, and they exploited their own world to such an extent they had stripped it of all these minerals. And so they set out to conquer the galaxy. In essence, this prologue is saying the kingdom, the monarchy, these are the bad guys. They are bad. And then an assassin came along and treacherously killed the king and the king's family. Oh, so the point of view is with a loyalist to the kingdom, because the kingdom, the king who is assassinated, is an evil guy. Created this giant army, set out this expansionist, colonialist strip mining of the universe, and they were assassinated. If this was from the position of the rebels, the assassin would be a hero. But no, this assassin is treacherous, a traitor, a bad guy. Oh, okay. And then the king and this monarchy has been replaced by a regent. Oh, so are they going to usher in change? No, it's exactly the same system, because they just continue what the king did. So what are the rebels trying to achieve? Are they trying to overthrow the regent to reestablish the monarchy? Well, why would we want that? We know the monarchy is bad. The monarchy designed this system. The monarchy propagated this system. The monarchy was in control of this system, built up these armies, and started this whole expansionist, treating everyone like scum. That's what the monarchy did. So why are we trying to reestablish it? Think of the difference between that and Star Wars. In Star Wars, there was the Republic, and the Republic mightn't have been perfect, but it was a democratic republic and people voted, and it was cumbersome and bureaucratic, but it was a republic, and it was taken over by an evil emperor and turned into something evil. It might have been inept, it mightn't have been efficient, but it wasn't evil. And it was turned into the empire, and the empire was evil. And therefore, the rebels were trying to overthrow the emperor and Darth Vader and the stormtroopers and all of the evil fascist space Nazis. That's what the rebels were trying to get rid of. What are the rebels trying to get rid of here? What is their end goal? The rebels in Star Wars are trying to re-establish the Republic, to re-establish democratic rule, to re-establish the rights of the people. That's something that ideologically, fundamentally, we can get behind. But in this, it's, well, the monarchy was evil, and now it's been replaced by a regent who is just as evil and is doing exactly the same things. We should rebel. So it's lacking the underpinning that Star Wars had. And Star Wars is by no means perfect, but it worked for the sort of morality play that it was. This doesn't, because the rebels are rebelling because they didn't care about any of this stuff until it came to their door. And now that it's at their door, they get up on their moral high horse going, well, this is wrong. You didn't care about it 5 minutes ago when it was happening to all of the other planets and all of the other people. So is this a story about realizing that we need greater awareness of the world to come together to see we can't wait for it to come to our door? No, that's not what it's about either. Because if it was, the focus of the story would be different. So that's part of the issue with the framing of Rebel Moon, for me at least. The second thing was, in order to disguise it and differentiate it from Star Wars, instead of the stormtroopers walking around in that style of uniform, it's almost like Zack Snyder took inspiration from 40K, from Warhammer 40K, and just copied that style of uniform and that style of approach to space fascism. Because the human Imperium in 40K, that's basically what this is. They look the same, they act the same, they are barbaric, and they're clearly evil. Although, well, that's going to be one of the issues with the 40K adaptation because the Imperium are not the good guys. No one in the 40K universe is the good guy. Everyone is the bad guy, which makes it difficult sometimes to tell stories in that universe. But anyway, Snyder seems to have borrowed a lot of the 40K visuals for his bad guys. And so it doesn't appear original there either. It's a lot of artwork that we've already seen associated with 40K properties. In particular, like recently, 40K released Rogue Trader, a role-playing game, and it's it's a lot of fun to play a space Nazi for some people. So the visuals from 40K are exaggerated and highly gothic, and heavily embellished and quite melodramatic, which doesn't fit with the tone that Snyder was going for. So again, we get a sort of superficial use of them. And then we get to, well, who are the good guys and who are the bad guys? Now, in Star Wars, again, there was a nice, clear, easy to understand binary. The Empire were all bad guys, and the Ragged Rebellion were all the good guys. And there was a nice differentiation of those two things. You knew that because, well, the bad guy soldiers were called stormtroopers. Darth Vader, big imposing guy in all black armor because it's slimming. Here, in order to get that across, we have people dressed like commissars uh, from the Russian army or in that old style imperial British outfit, which is certainly evocative, carrying a giant bone stick like a reject from 2001: A Space Odyssey, and being brutal simply to be brutal, being evil simply to be evil. And this is an old style aspect of storytelling. If someone is evil at heart, we have them look physically evil in that they are ugly, they are deformed, they are old and wrinkled and disgusting. And here we have the bad guys all looking evil. This was trite and cliched even in the Victorian period. And to see it now replicated in the 21st century is again slightly disappointing. But if that wasn't enough to hammer home how evil these people were, even though they're part of an evil expansionist, colonialist, rapine culture that just steals from all of these colonies and wipes people out, even if that wasn't enough to convince us how evil they were, we have a section that feels like it was ripped straight out of Braveheart, whereby the older soldiers find one of the young villagers and go, oh, she's nice. Let's be creepy and intimidating and then try and rape her. Again, this was done in Braveheart, and it was one of those creepy things done in Braveheart to show how evil the English were in Braveheart. But Braveheart was leaning into a lot of these stereotypes. The Scots were warrior poets. The Irish were all mad. The Welsh were kind of non-existent. The English were all cruel and evil. And the French were all romantics. There are criticisms that can be labeled at Braveheart for its stereotyping, for its latitude when it came to interpreting historical events. And it was very much almost a melodrama. But that sequence from Braveheart, as over the top as it was, fitted with kind of that over the top storytelling. But here is just one more note of, well, we know these are the bad guys, and here they are doing bad guy things, and we've just seen them be really bad guys. And here's another thing that is them being bad guys. And this time, oh, look, it's they're threatening a woman with sexual violence. Like that hasn't become a cliche. So Snyder's already building on a very shaky foundation where we don't have an ideological underpinning about why we should be supporting these rebels, apart from the fact that this empire, this monarchy that they're opposing, which has always been evil and bad, they have now decided now is evil and bad. It lacks that coherency. But then we come to the Seven Samurai portion of collecting together these heroes who are going to help defend the village. So we've already talked about the fact they meet not Han Solo and they get on his ship, not the Millennium Falcon, to go and find other people to help fight not Darth Vader. And in doing so, they come across the first of the people that they're trying to recruit, who we find out is a prince or a leader from a nation that was disposed of. But he's currently a slave and a blacksmith who is bare chested. I am willing to forgive a lot when it comes to fantasy and science fiction storytelling, but someone hammering away at white hot metal with a hammer on an anvil with sparks flying everywhere, and they're not wearing some sort of protective vest, he should be covered in burns. But he's not. He's gloriously oiled up. And then we have this whole sequence, which is him taming a Pegasus. You might think, oh, well, this is going to be revelatory about his character. He has some connection to beasts. He has some sort. No, it's basically Alexander taming Bellerophon, the horse. That's it. Zack Snyder has talked about this in interviews, saying he always loved that story, so he just put it in. It is no connection to who this person is as a character, what their backstory is. He's meant to be a prince from a nation that was destroyed by this evil monarchy. And yet somehow he's a natural blacksmith and Pegasus wrangler. And then we get to meet Nemesis. So aside from taking a Greek name and applying it to someone of Eastern culture, she is armed with two swords because obviously in a future world where everyone is armed with guns, you need someone to wield a sword. And what's better than one sword? Two swords, because it's twice as swordy. And she is trying to rescue a child from a giant spider monster. Now, obviously, this is very different to the incident in The Seven Samurai by Kurosawa, where the samurai have to rescue a child who's been kidnapped. It's completely different because this one involves a spider monster. And this spider monster, which is living in the middle of these mines, in the middle of this city, where there are all of these people around, and has these webs everywhere, and where everyone is armed with a gun, it doesn't occur to any of them to shoot it, ever. Now, I know the complaint, but they couldn't shoot it for fear of hitting the child. Halfway through this combat, the spider creature throws the kid away and is in the middle of the combat, and they're all still standing around, all armed with a variety of ranged weapons, and not a single one of them pulls a gun to shoot the thing. And this is a thing that has these giant spider webs everywhere. It's clearly been living there for a while, and no one thought to try and get rid of it. Why is this sequence here? It's here to showcase Nemesis's ability to use these swords. And halfway through the fight, she ignites them because they're not lightsabers. They function very, very differently to other glowy swords because they're not lightsabers. They're swords that she ignites into some sort of, they become superheated metal thing. And again, it's a superficial veneer and gloss over something that is clearly unoriginal. But ultimately, they then go to try and recruit this amazing general, this brilliant strategic genius. We are told so many times about his strategic genius. And because of time constraints, they basically go, well, we kind of need you. And they talk him into it, and he gets on the thing. There's nothing else to that. What does he add to the story? Well, do they have an army that is going to require someone with strategic training and military training in order to organize all of this? No, it's going to be like just the six of them. Like, I mean, if he'd organized tea and snacks, he actually would have been more effective and more engaging and added more to their group than what he does. And again, this none of this is the actor's fault. Some of the actors actually give great performances. They're just handed this steaming pile of, I apologize. This is not about me ranting and complaining about this. I want to talk about the elements and why I think they don't work. But ultimately, in all of this, in the gathering together of these things, the last person is a rebel leader who already has an army, who gives the stirring speech and asks for volunteers, then gets these volunteers, and they all head off. And that's all well and good. But counter to all of this, so many elements seem directly from the Seven Samurai and just given a light polish, and as if we are not going to notice that they've been lifted wholesale. Some of the elements are directly from Star Wars, and they've been given a light polish, as if we're not going to notice where they are from. And Snyder has been crowing about how original this story is. But none of this story is original. It, it is a paint by numbers assemblage of scenes from other stories that have been stuck together in a narrative frame that lacks cohesiveness and coherency. And then we get to the crux of the matter. The hero, as it turns out, is Gamora from Marvel's MCU, because she was a young girl and this general arrived on her planet, killed everyone, but adopted her and trained her and turned her into this warrior. And then she rebelled and ran away. Seriously, Zack Snyder took Gamora's storyline from Guardians of the Galaxy, including the flashback sequence to the evil bad guy standing with her and giving her a weapon, put it in this film as if this was an original idea. And it turns out she was one of the space fascists. And we see this Nuremberg rally-esque speech, which again, they've already used in Star Wars a couple of times, so this isn't particularly new. And we see the king standing there, brandishing this bone stick like 2001, addressing his troops who are going to go out and conquer the galaxy. This being the same king that later on is going, oh, well, you know, my daughter, the beautiful, wonderful princess, she's going to bring change. She's going to be great. And we're meant to somehow empathize and sympathize with this evil dictator, this head of a fascist regime, because later on in life he goes, well, my daughter might make amends, even though I have this giant army. I could order them to do something. If this had been framed that he was a reformer who was trying to stop them doing this, and the evil Belisarius opposed that, that would be one thing. But that's not what this story is. This story is he's just as evil as the rest of them. Why? This is why it gets so frustrating. Even the sequence where they're all standing on a dock, and it's clearly heavily telegraphed. Curse your sudden but inevitable betrayal. Like it's not subtle, but they're standing on this sort of dock area, and the rebel leader turns and yells up to these people flying overhead. In a science fiction universe where they have at least radios, but he yells orders up to these people flying overhead. Just use a radio. A communicator on your neck, a throat mic, something. It's a science fiction universe. Why yell? It's dumb. It doesn't make sense. How are they meant to have heard him over the roar of their engines and the fact that they're 60 feet up in the air or 80 feet up in the air? Even the fact that there's a giant ship hiding behind a rock. They flew from space down, around and landed, but didn't notice the giant spaceship that was floating right by where they were landing. So much of this is poorly done and relies on flashy visuals to disguise the shoddy storytelling. So let's talk about some of these visuals. There is a sequence where the main character sees her dead lover, the soldier, lying in the snow, and then there are explosions going on around her, and it's all in slow motion. And then there's this, come on, much like in Starship Troopers, come on, you apes, you want to live forever? And they charge into the enemy, and she opens fire, and there's bullets in slow motion, and the snow is falling. And we're meant to see this as a powerful, emotive, poignant scene. When what it comes across as is a fetishization of violence as a militaristic propaganda piece. Tonally, it is so dissonant. We are watching this person as part of an evil empire destroy and subjugate people. And we're meant to empathize with her in this moment. We're meant to see it as beautiful. We're meant to see it as poignant. When this is meant to be horrific, because this is what she learned, that she was part of an evil empire and she never should have been doing this, and she's learned her lesson. But the way that the story is being told, the way it is being shown, we're meant to empathize and sympathize with her. We're meant to find this strangely beautiful. And it seems almost distasteful. That's one of the issues I have with Snyder's use of slow motion to create these visual effects. Creating beauty in this violence almost fetishizes it. And for a story about rebelling against evil and rebelling against fascism and rebelling against this totalitarian regime, glorifying and fetishizing the violence that this regime perpetrates seems counterintuitive. But one of the last things I want to talk about here is on a more technical aspect. This was made on a much more limited budget than a lot of the Marvel and DC and all of these big budget blockbusters. And Snyder has always had an eye for visual storytelling, of creating an interesting, visually arresting composition. That slick violence of 300, the over-the-top, violent action sequences and Sucker Punch. Snyder has a way of creating these fantastical, violent pieces. No one should ever take that away from him. He creates something visually arresting in it. How it's being used, that is something obviously I have a bit of a problem with, but his execution of that is always interesting. But in this, we have a lot of digital backgrounds that seem to have a completely different lighting scheme to the soundstage that the actors are standing on, or where there is a sequence that's obviously filmed on location and they've digitally inserted things. It doesn't always work. It slips into the uncanny valley and it's just slightly uncomfortable. And one of the things I think is a great analogy for everything about Rebel Moon that I find wrong is there are these horse creatures. So this is the far future. There are robots, there are spaceships, there are these advanced mechanical things. But these farmers are using space horses to plow their fields. Fair enough. So they have these giant dray horses. I'm not sure which breed, but they are giant horses. They're giant actual horses. And for some reason, instead of just having giant horses, they stuck these uncomfortable, silly looking headpieces to the foreheads of these horses, as if we aren't going to notice that this is just a horse with something stuck to its head. That is my problem with the whole of Rebel Moon. It is a by the numbers, stereotypical ripoff of a lot of other stories that have been badly put together, and then this very light varnish put over the top of it to try to disguise all of the cracks and where these things came from, and hoping that we're not going to notice. Now, Snyder has talked about how when he envisaged this and how he pitched it to Netflix, there would be this sort of PG-13 version that would be released generally, and then he was going to do an R-rated cut. This was Snyder's plan from the beginning, nothing to do with Netflix. He proposed this to Netflix. They agreed it because they get to double dip as well. And Snyder has said in a number of interviews that the R-rated version is his true vision, which A leads to the question, then why release the other one if it's not your vision of the story, given that you claim co-writing credit, you claim directorial credit, you were in charge of this entire thing. So you give everyone a watered down version and then the actual version. But even then, what R-rated material is suddenly going to change the fact that the initial narrative framework doesn't make sense, all because of the word treacherous and the fact that it is a ripoff of the storyline of Star Wars? How are you going to change the fact that the hero and their companion going to the Mos Eisley Cantina that's not the Mos Eisley Cantina and getting into a bar fight that's not the Mos Eisley bar fight? How are you going to change that? You're going to add blood to it. That doesn't change the narrative void that is there. That's just more ephemera. That's just more sprinkles in the glaze. The sequence whereby the evil guy has this weird octopus thing in the background that looks like it was ripped off of the idea in The Fifth Element, Luc Besson's movie, that had the strange little creature in the bad guy's desk that clearly he was using for personal usage. That seems implied. In the R-rated version, are we going to see tentacle porn? That doesn't remove the deficiencies of this story. That the bad guys are cartoonishly bad for no reason. That what they replaced was exactly the same as the thing that they replaced. They, they, the bad guys are just a continuation of the bad guys. It doesn't matter if the king or queen or princess is in control. It's an evil empire. The rebels are uncaring about anything about this evil empire as long as it leaves them alone, because that's how it's always been. Presumably they came from the evil empire because this empire's been there from the beginning. He can't disguise with blood and gore and more explosions the fact that the whole sequence with the blacksmith horse tamer is absolutely irrelevant to that character's backstory. And they don't even take the Pegasus thing with them. It's just this random moment. Maybe there might be an additional fight scene with the general to show why they were there, or something about his backstory, about why he's venerated, because we're just simply told over and over and over again that he's a strategic genius. We're just told that. We never see it. All we hear about is, oh, he withdrew his troops because he didn't want to be evil. How is that a strategic genius? We're just told he is. And the sudden but inevitable betrayal that happens is telegraphed so hard that unless you're drinking heavily or not paying attention, there is no way that you'd be surprised by that. It was terrible. It was bad. It was bad storytelling. Everything about this is ham-fisted, blunt, unsophisticated, and lacking nuance. All of the most interesting facets are clearly identifiable from other stories. It is disappointing. And the reason it is so disappointing is because we want more original stories. We want studios and producers to take a chance on creating something different that isn't already an established IP, that isn't already an established franchise. We want risks to be taken. I just wished that maybe Rebel Moon had lived up to any of the hype, because even the CGI in some places looked unfinished, which was amazing because in some sequences it's brilliant, and then the very next sequence, what happened here, and then it's back to being brilliant, and then it's back to, oh, you just didn't get done in time. This is such a disappointment because it could have been really interesting. Star Wars has shown that it can tell amazing stories. Andor, for one, is a brilliant story set in the Star Wars universe that doesn't involve lightsabers and Jedi and Sith. It doesn't involve space wizards of whatever lineage. It was a rooted, grounded, Cold War espionage narrative. It was fantastic, really well done. Rogue One as a film was a really interesting film because it wasn't focused on, oh, are they a Skywalker, a Palpatine? Who cares? Rogue One was an interesting story that used the Star Wars universe as a vehicle for it, but told an interesting story. There's a lot that can be done within these franchises to tell original, interesting stories. But stealing bits from them to couple together in some sort of Frankensteinian monstrosity and then claim that it's original is disingenuous at best. But anyway, these are just my thoughts on it. So thank you very much for watching. Thank you for your continued support, and I will see you in the next one.